Yeah, so hi, my name is Fabian. I'm with the Web3 Foundation. I'm the CEO over there. So Web3 Foundation is sort of like the protocol foundation behind the Polkadot network. I'm not going to spend too much time here talking about Polkadot or the Web3 Foundation, really. I'm going to give just a quick sort of like introduction into how the Polkadot governance system looks like and what I've spent sort of like the last years wrestling with in the world of on-chain governance, just to give you a sense for sort of like what I'm drawing my lessons from. But I'm very quickly going to shift into just talking about things that I've learned in sort of like building decentralized governance systems, building them on chain and building them at scale. Yeah, so we're just going to jump right in. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to say is going to be pretty high level, just given the time constraints. But if someone wants to jump deeper into some of these topics, happy to talk off stage. So, like I said very briefly, what is the Polkadot DAO, or what is Polkadot maybe initially? Like I said, I'm not going to spend much time here, but Polkadot really is first a way to build blockchains, to do that in a secure way, in a highly scalable way, in a highly customizable way. And then once you have built those blockchains, it's a network to connect those blockchains, to operate them, to make them interoperable, and to secure them under a unified security umbrella. That whole system is governed by the DOT token and its holders. Any decision that is being made about this system is then autonomously being enacted on the system. So why do I call this the world's largest DAO? Obviously, it's a little bit, you can, depending on how you slice it, you might come to a conclusion that some DAO is larger, but it's primarily based on those numbers here. Right, so what does this governance system, what does this DAO actually govern? It governs really three key areas. So one is what we call the relay chain. So this is the chain that sort of like coordinates, that sits in the middle of the Polkadot ecosystem and coordinates all of the other chains that plug into it. And that sits, depending on the day, at well above $10 billion. Then you have all of the chains that actually plug into it. They sit well above $1 billion, actually way higher than that. And then all the projects that are built on top of those chains, that's going to be actually hard to measure, but you're going to be in the hundreds and hundreds of millions on top of that. And then it governs something that we call the Polkadot Treasury. It's maybe a DAO more in the most simplistic way of thinking about a DAO. It's a pot of money, and people can vote on who is going to be the beneficiary of that pot of money. I think we see a lot of those kind of DAOs out there, especially in sort of like more smart contract-y kind of systems. But that exists in the Polkadot, on top of the Polkadot system as well. Currently sits at well over 250 million in various assets, like obviously in DOT, and how the crypto economic system of Polkadot works is that replenishes in DOT. But it also, is relatively sophisticated in its, even in its narrow form, in the sense that it automatically, programmatically swaps into native USDT and USDC. So it sort of like diversifies its own assets. It holds other ecosystem tokens, so it's sort of like almost like a sovereign wealth fund, if you want. It like invests in its own economy. It pays for crucial roles, like actual real individuals are employed by this sort of like on-chain mechanism, right? That sort of like take on crucial roles within the ecosystem. You have a way of tipping people that do great work in the system, right? It's just sort of like, hey, this guy's done something great, give them some money from this pot. Bounties is essentially a way of creating like sub-treasuries, like little sort of like a representative democracy kind of pockets with their own budgets and their own experts that can then decide what to do with it, and so on. I mean, we could talk for a long time about the system. All I really want to say with that, this is why I call it the world's largest DAO, because it's a relatively sophisticated system that we've built there to really not just govern a pot of money or govern a blockchain, but really govern a whole ecosystem of blockchains. Right? And this is one of the reasons why you often hear people say Polkadot is a meta protocol, right? Rather than if you think about Bitcoin or Ethereum, that are really like protocols, like you sort of like formalize a certain set of rules, and then people can put those set of rules into code, and then they comply with that protocol. What is going on? AC? Okay. It's a train. Oh, wow. Okay. All right. Where was I? Yeah, meta protocol. Exactly. So rather than just sort of like statically defining what the protocol is, right? What you would otherwise see. Oh, this is crazy. It specifies a meta protocol, right? It doesn't specify exactly what Polkadot is, but rather it specifies sort of like a framework for what the Polkadot protocol, how the Polkadot protocol can exist and can evolve, right? And through that, the Polkadot protocol can actually, in very quick iterations, programmatically change, all of its parameters, really change its own code, right? Whereas in sort of like Bitcoin and Ethereum land, you have how does governance work? It usually works sort of like a lot of like social consensus, soft power, open conversations, but also a lot of backroom conversations, and then hard forks, contentious or otherwise, and that's sort of like the way to resolve things. What Polkadot does is essentially just bring all of those forces into the open, formalize them on chain, and make those votes really visible to everyone else, and then build a system that more like a living organism can like really adapt itself to the needs of the community and the market and the evolution of technology. Okay, so I think actually I spent a little bit more here than I wanted to, but really I didn't want to speak that much about Polkadot. I really wanted to speak about what have we learned in building the system and launching the system over the last 5 or so years. So really since the launch of Polkadot, we've taken a very radical stance on on-chain governance and saying whatever can be governed on-chain should be governed on-chain. And we have not really budged from that stance, but we've learned some things, and some of those lessons were learned the hard way. Some of them we've taken into account, from the start. But in any case, sharing them here so people can maybe not do the same mistakes again, or just learn from the things that we've done right. So the first one might be a bit of an obvious one, but I call it here start with training wheels. I think the basic insight that underlies this lesson is that a lot of decisions in governance, in on-chain governance, are sort of like one-way decisions, right? They're quite easy to make, but very, very difficult to roll back. Sometimes impossible to roll back, right? So it's really important that you move with intention, right? And what the intention is, it doesn't really matter. I mean, there's many ways you might want to lean into an on-chain governance system, right? It could be regulatory-wise. You don't want to be in the center and hold all of the keys. It could be for community empowerment and engagement. It could have like actual effectiveness reasons, like you think it's just better done that way. There's all kinds of reasons to do it. But the important piece is do it gradually, do it with intention, and don't let go of something that you might want to have control over still later on. The second point is very related, right? Decentralization and effectiveness are often opposed. So the most effective way of doing things is getting a bunch of highly capable, highly leveraged people in one room and like locking them up there and saying like figure it out, right? Like that's the most effective way of doing things. And whenever you move away from that model, things will get less effective, right? And so when you build an open, like everyone in the world can buy tokens and participate in this decision-making process, this is kind of like a polar opposite, right? Of like locking a bunch of people in the room and saying let's go. And so you just have to know that every decision, every time you're going to move away from this like very focused, highly leveraged model, it comes at a cost, right? And I'm not saying it's never worth it to pay that price, but just be aware that there is a price. And sometimes it's more important to be effective than to be decentralized, right? And in some places. And so, and certainly as you maybe mature as a project, right? That equilibrium or that equation might change. And so, again, just be very intentional about this piece. Focus on code and culture. And really, I should have underlined the culture point here, because how foundational do I want to go? So. yeah, to maybe take one step back. So if you think about nation-state governance, which generally I think is a good place to learn for on-chain governance, there's a lot of stuff. Okay, maybe even one step further. So, why governance? What do we actually govern? Usually we govern institutions in some sense. And why do we care about institutions? We care about institutions because if I want to do something in the world, right, I only want to do that with people I know and I trust, right? And if I want to go beyond doing something with people I know and I trust, well, I have to create some form of institution. So, well, I don't know all of the people anymore, but I know and trust the institution, and I know everyone will follow the rules of that institution. And what is the institution? The institution is just a set of rules, right? So this could be a company, this could be a nation state, it could be a DAO, right? And in the traditional world, how do we set those rules? We set them in language, right? And we sign documents, we have constitutions, we have laws, we have rules, right? That sort of like govern society. And how do we do it in DAOs? Well, we write it in code. We write the same kind of rules. We try to sort of like mathematically define them and put them in code. Now, okay, so if we have that sort of like as sort of like the foundation, then one thing you'll realize is, and there's a lot of things that make governance systems and the governance of institutions work that you cannot put in language or in code. And this is something we're seeing on nation states play out, over the last couple of years, and I think this is going to intensify as we go into the next few years. As in sort of like the Western democracies, the political spectrums are being shuffled around. You often see headlines like, whatever. I think it's really started with Trump. Like, Trump is doing this. Like, he can't do that. Like, that's the, how can he? Is this allowed? Turns out, it's not like there's a law that says you're not allowed to do it, right? I mean, in some cases there is, but often it's social norms that make our societies work. There's only so much you can actually put in code and in language. And, the same thing is true for DAOs. Like, the social norms, the culture you build around your system is as important, and maybe more important than what you can put in code. And I think there's a lot of technologists in the space that think so like, you can put it all in code, and code is law, and this is how it's all going to work. And you on the whiteboard you have all of this like mechanism design and game theory and all of these incentives, and this is why people will behave that way, which is true to some extent, right? But if you talk about complex governance system, you have to be able, or you have to really have a focus on social norms. How are people actually going to be interacting with that code, right? Are the proposals they're going to send to this DAO, are they going to be formatted this way or that way, right? Are they going to go to the community in that forum or this forum? Are we discussing them in a way where we shout at each other, or where we have a high standard for constructive disagreement? All of those things are things that you'll have to set. And the best way to set them is just leading by example, because most likely if you're going to launch a DAO, you're also going to be a big participant in the DAO. Yeah, anyways, a lot in there, but I think this culture component is very important. Yeah, this is also a bit of a, I think, standard meme when people talk about decentralization and governance is, you don't want to, decentralization is not just like sniping out one leader, like, okay, Vitalik is not doing that much anymore, therefore Ethereum decentralized. It's really about having the proliferation of many, many leaders, right? And many people who can sort of like, can rally people behind them and lead them and drive opinion. I think the important piece here is that the leaders, like, I mean, a couple of important points, but one is, what I mean with leaders is not just individuals, right? Leaders can be foundations in your ecosystem. They can be for-profit businesses. They can be collectives. They can be local community groups. I mean, whatever it might be, right? And if you are in the business of launching DAOs, you should also be in the business of empowering people in the community to take on leadership positions. So those should be, again, organizations that are ideally well capitalized, well organized, and are well plugged into the information flow of your ecosystem. Ideally have built up a certain kind of reputation in your ecosystem, or known actors, right? All of those things are really important. be sure to shard. So what do I mean with this? It comes back to what I was saying earlier with sort of like representative democracy. So if you look at nation states, for example, most nation states, as much as we love democracy, most nation states do not, go all the way and just have this like pure play direct democracy, right? I mean, Switzerland is maybe the most extreme case of that, right? Like if you're a citizen of Switzerland, what might happen to you is like you'll be asked like, should the government buy 14 new Eurofighter fighter jets for its army, right? That might be that legit has happened in the past, right? Now, to answer such a question, right, the amount of knowledge you have to have about military procurement, geopolitics, geography, like the transition from manned to unmanned air power in militaries, pilot training. I mean, I could go on and on, right? Like the amount of knowledge you have to make that decision is crazy. So I actually think Switzerland is a very interesting governance system, and probably most nation states can learn something from it. But there's a reason why most states don't govern their countries like that, is because most citizens should not have, they don't have anything to say about Eurofighter jets, right? And you have something very similar going on in DAOs. You'll have, especially if you talk about sophisticated DAOs and large DAOs of the scale of what I was describing here in Polkadot, you'll have decisions about where the system should go technically, right? Like, should we take this kind of like scaling approach or this kind of scaling approach? You have to be very deep in sort of like the research of maybe cryptography or distributed systems. And the next decision might be, should we, drive that kind of marketing campaign or this kind of marketing campaign? There's very few people who have a very informed opinion about both of those questions. So what do you want to do? You want to sort of like shard, to stay in blockchain technology terms, decision making, right? You want to have a level of representative democracy. Instead of voting about what should be done, you vote on who should make the decision, right? And like I said, very common. That's how most democracies work. It's not how most DAOs work, but if you become sophisticated enough and complex enough, this is really what you should be doing. Yeah, never let a good crisis go to waste. I think this is attributed to Churchill, so we're staying in the nation-state analogy. What's a good example here? So, first of all, I think it's important to say you're going to have some form of crises at some point. Like, if your DAO is relevant, it's going to go through some moments of intense disagreement, and people will have, widely opposing opinions. I think if you don't have that, you're probably not relevant enough, right? Now, one situation you're in if you have a crisis is you probably want some form of change. Something's probably not working. And you actually have two really good conditions in a crisis that help you to enact on change, right? Which is you have attention, people are paying attention, and people are emotionally bought into it. People care, right? So those are actually pretty good. That's pretty good in terms of timing to actually bring about change. So if you have a crisis, don't sit around and like, oh, let's let this blow over, and then we'll see, and then we'll figure it out, and in 2 months we can sort of like tackle this. When the crisis is going on, I think that's when you really should start with the change, because it tends to be very good timing. So in Polkadot land, I don't know if how much people are paying attention, but in Polkadot land, we had sort of like a mid-sized crisis, I would say. Early summer or so of last year. So a huge debate about how much the DAO should spend on marketing, and it was this big activist group that was like very pro like spending on marketing, and had quite a bit of political sway, and managed to like get a lot of that through. And then sort of like, other people disagreed, the whole thing got picked up by media and so on, and suddenly you had a big moment of crisis. And the community really took that to heart. And if you look at Polkadot governance today, it's probably never been more effective around a lot of these issues than it is today because, you know, a lot of these institutions matured. But it's not because people were just sitting around. It's because people say, like, now is the opportunity to actually tackle an issue that a lot of people knew prior was there, but the attention wasn't there and people weren't caring enough about it. And then the last point, and then I'm running out of time too, expect chaos. So this is sort of like the tagline of our testnet called Kusama, where we roll out a lot of our governance innovations before we roll it out to Polkadot. But it's generally true whether you have such a network or not, there's going to be some chaos, right? Like even the most well-governed entities, institutions in the world have some drama, right? I think that's ultimately what is governance for. Governance is there to sort of like disagree and then go beyond that disagreement. So you should be ready for some disagreement. I think that's just part of the game. Yeah, that's it. Thanks so much.